Hello, my name's Galena. I'm the fiance of Joshua Lee McCollister, who was murdered on July 8th by Deunn Willis and robbed by Danielle Durand. I'm a rabbi. This is something that I guess a lot of people online have seen and has been an indicator to them that the whole thing with my father is not true. I guess I don't look like what they anticipate a rabbi would look like. I was the youngest rabbi in my class, and the video from my rabbinical school actually features me in it the year that I was ordained. So it kind of baffles me that I've had to argue about whether or not I'm really Jewish. I'm a proud Jewish woman, or rather that I have to argue about whether I'm a rabbi. I'm a proud rabbi. However, because of what my father did, I've never been employed as a rabbi. I've had to focus on this other thing instead, because I felt like this was the priority. When Josh was murdered, I, of course, had to look at things from some kind of godly perspective, especially because, while Josh and I came from different religions, we were very spiritually compatible. I really loved it about him, how devout he was, how he always said his prayers. And I know that he would want this examined from a spiritual perspective, what happened up there. And so I have some positive words about that. Josh had a very difficult life. He was put up against a monster, essentially. The very vilest human being imaginable, I think. And I really believe that molded him very much into being able to, in Mendocino County, do what he did for missing and murdered girls. Because he'd had that practice with a monster. You know, I think that God needed a warrior. And unfortunately, that's not something that you become because you elect to be it. You become a warrior because you have no choice. And that was Josh's story. And he was going to make the best of a terrible situation. He was going to go fighting bad guys to the very end, but it was a very hard road that he had to walk. And I feel like at the end, the way he died, God was saying, "You did a good job, Josh McCollister. I'm going to give you a few nice things right at the end of your life that you haven't had." And those three things I'd like to talk about. Josh was autistic. Oh, he was so proud to be autistic. Oh my goodness. That autism tattoo, that was just scratching the surface. I mean, he would talk about autism with anybody. He just loved to talk about autism. He didn't want his name out. He didn't want his photo out. For all the stuff he did with missing and murdered girls, he wanted his privacy maintained. But the one thing that he wanted people to know was that the posse had a lot of autistics in it. He wanted to be known not as a serial killer fighter or, warrior. He wanted people to know that this guy, who was going to go under the pseudonym Jack, that Jack was an autistic serial killer hunter, that he was an autistic warrior. He wanted the autism community in the long run to have that aspect of the story, to know that if you get picked on your whole life the way he was, you know what? You can still turn around and do this good that other people may not be capable of. You know, he really wanted to be a pride to his people, as it were. But he was also very lonely. You know, if you're an autistic adult in a small town, chances are you're not going to be running into other people like you very often. And I think that it was a kindness from God that God gave Josh before he died, that he let Josh fall in with a crowd of other autistics up there in Humboldt. And these people, you know, when I met them, I was like, they were so him, you know, like, we only wanted about 10 people at our wedding, and I know walking in a room with these people, yeah, they would have been at our wedding. It would have been from 10 to 12, because they were just so simpatico with the way he thought. I really consider that a gift from God, that he fell in with an autism crowd up in Humboldt. And you know, another thing that I think was God giving Josh McCollister a pat on the back is that, you know, we looked at properties together where we wanted to live. We wanted trees, maybe a field, but we wanted a river because Josh loves to fish. And Josh was going to go out in the morning and he was going to catch fish and bring them in, and he loved to cook fish. He was an excellent cook, just absolutely fantastic. You know, it's not easy being on the streets. It's not pretty. But where Josh died, he'd been there for about 2 weeks, I was told, and it was beautiful. It was so gorgeous. It was exactly like what we'd wanted to buy someday if we ever got money. It was exactly perfect. Like, Josh wanted us to have a house. He was fine with building it if he had to. And he wanted a house next door or nearby for his parents. That, you know, that was so important to him, that Pops and Mama Bear could come over and, you know, see the grandkids every day, the ones we had and the ones we were gonna have. And I know that when Josh was there for those 2 weeks, that he would have been thinking that he was this was where he was supposed to end up, is someplace that looked like this. I remember he told me, it was a few weeks before he died, for the first time in his life, he actually had hope. And I know that God taking him to this particular spot and letting him be in this beautiful spot for the last few weeks of his life, again, that was him getting a pat on the back for all the good that he'd done. I truly feel that anyway. And the last thing that I have to say I'm really grateful to God for is, even though Josh was murdered, even though he was shot senselessly, needlessly, brutally, and cruelly, he was fortunate enough to have 2 people there that loved him. He was there while they tried to save he saw people try to save his life. And I have no doubt that when he passed out from the blood loss, he thought he was going to be okay, because these people who loved him were going to take care of him. And even though he hung on for a very long time, I've heard about 45 minutes, He passed out at the same spot where he was shot, same spot I've sat in, up against a tree. The last thing he saw was the forest, not the top of an ambulance. His nickname was actually Tree, J-Tree. I never called him that. I always called him Josh or Jay. But he loved nature so much. He deserved to die in beauty like that. I feel like all the fighting Josh did in his life, trying to make the world a better place for others, this was God giving him that pat on the back and saying, okay, Josh McCollister, it's time to come home. But I'm going to let you have these nice things here at the end. And that really comforts me. That really makes me happy. I'm happy that Josh died with a sensation of hope in his heart. Belief that the future was going to be easier. Because I remember when he moved to Fort Bragg, I used to say to him, all I want for you is calm. All I want for you is a calm, quiet life, my friend. Peace. And he'd say to me, calm? What's that? Peace? What's that? Because Josh never got to have it. The closest he ever had was, of course, Colleen. You know, that's one thing. Josh may not have had an easy life, but he did have a life where he was truly, truly loved and cherished. And a piece of calm that I have is I know at least that when he did die in that ambulance, after last seeing those beautiful trees, so at least he went right back into the arms of Colleen. That sustains me so much. If I thought he was alone over there, that would be so much harder. And that dream I had where I think of him in the celestial version of Lincoln City, what he told me is his grandma, who he loved so much, she would have liked me because our goal was to get to Lincoln City, and that's where he lived with her. He said, Grandma would have liked you because you're bringing her grandson back to her. You know, back to where she died, but still. So, if Josh is over there in Lincoln City, I just like to think that he's back with his grandma, and he's back with his beloved Colleen. That's what gets me through it, at least.